Museum. My name's Lucy, I'm a curator here, and I'd like to welcome you to the first of our online talks related to our fantastic new exhibition, Richard III Coming Home. If you visit the Yorkshire Museum from now until the end of October, you'll be able to enjoy the fantastic portrait of Richard III that you can see behind me, which is on loan from the National Portrait Gallery. And we've surrounded that by treasures from our own collection. We have one of the most fantastic collections of archaeological objects related to Richard III in the whole country. So we're celebrating that collection and this spectacular loan from the National Portrait Gallery. This afternoon, I'm going to let you get up close and personal with one of those objects from the collection. This is the first of a series of short curated talks which will focus on one or a small collection of objects from the Yorkshire Museum's vast collections that are on display in this exhibition. And this afternoon, we're going to look at the Stillingfleet Boar Badge, a fantastic livery badge that would have been worn by a supporter of Richard III. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the badge, maybe for about 10 minutes, but I'd encourage you to ask your questions through the comments section on either Facebook or YouTube or wherever you're watching, and I'll try my very best to answer them depending on how difficult they are at the end of my talk. Let's start by having a look at this fantastic object. So hopefully we all know that our computer screens can be varying in quality, but hopefully you're able to see the detail on this tiny but spectacular object. So this tiny little silver boar, it is very small. I put my kind of finger in for scale, but that doesn't particularly help. It measures about 3.5 centimetres across, and it weighs just over 8 grams. So it's incredibly tiny, but as you can see, it's incredibly detailed, and it tells a huge story, and it's connected to King Richard himself. So let's talk a little bit about the circumstances of discovery for this object first. So this object was found by a metal detectorist who was searching in the fields surrounding a small village called Stillingfleet in the Vale of York, which is about 6 miles south of the city. And in 2010, they struck, well, in this case, silver, and found this spectacular object. It was determined as treasure with a capital T, and that's a special class of objects that are a certain number of years old and have a certain amount of precious metal content. What's great about treasure is that museums local to the find get the opportunity to acquire items of treasure. And thanks to a generous donation from the Richard III Society and other members of the public, the Yorkshire Museum were able to add this fantastic object to its collections back in 2010. So what is it? You've seen that it's a tiny little silver boar, but perhaps if I pick it up out of its mount here, ooh, shaky hands today, we can have a look in a bit more detail. So as I've said, on the front here, you can see the spectacular decoration of a very detailed boar. And if I turn it over, you can see that we have this attachment loop here. And this really tells us what this object was used for. This loop would have been used to stitch this badge onto clothing, perhaps a lapel or even a hat, to be worn and displayed by the wearer. This is a very particular type of badge. It's called a livery badge. Livery badges were a well-used type of dress accessory in the medieval period, and they have a very particular use. They're worn by supporters of particular lords or noble households. And the symbols, in this case the animal that is displayed on the badge, is a symbol of that lord or noble, the person who you are in support of. The term livery comes from the French liver, which basically means kind of a payment. The trace of the root of the word comes from when lords used to give their retainers and servants a dress code to wear almost. They used to provide their clothing. However, it became more used for just this badge, this symbol of support. They started their life as an object as a kind of military origin. It's very useful to be able to see in the, I suppose, the melee of battle, quite obviously, which side the person you may be fighting is on. So you can see which noble family they're fighting for by looking at their badge. However, and as we'll discover with the story of Richard III, they become a much wider, more widely used type of object worn by not just military personnel. They become a bit more of a form of propaganda, really. And what's quite interesting is that Richard III was actually one of the final monarchs, the final monarch, to use livery badges such as this in a really widespread way. He distributed various forms and at different occasions. However, Henry Tudor, who becomes the king after Richard III, he really restricts the use of livery badges to only the king and those closest to him, possibly to deter kind of revolts and groups of people forming behind a kind of strong symbol of a ruler that wasn't him. So, as I have said, this is the symbol of Richard III, the white boar. Why did Richard choose this as his symbol? Well, it's all about the symbolic properties and characteristics that the boar embodies. So boars are fierce, ferocious and strong animals. They're very large in size, very intimidating. And in fact, even though this example is very, very wee indeed, it's rather intimidating too. If we start with the snout end, you can see a snarling mouth with these rather intimidating tusks, bulging eyes, a really kind of sticking up crest, bristling almost. You can almost sense the movement there. And then if we go down to the end, we also have a pair of fairly prominent testes. So all of these elements symbolizing strength. However, it's the white boar. The colour white, contrastingly, would have symbolized in the minds of the viewer and in medieval society purity and loyalty. So the white boar really kind of brings together all of those different ideal qualities that you'd want to see in your ruler. Somebody loyal, fair, pure, pious, but also strong and able to get the job done. This is a very special type of livery badge because of the materials that it's made from. This badge is made of silver, and then it was originally gilded, covered in thin gold to make it look like solid gold. There are only teeny tiny traces of this gilding on the object. You can kind of see little bits here, down at the rear end and on the feet. But originally, this object would have looked spectacular and shining. Precious metal livery badges and precious metal livery badges symbolising the white boar, only a handful are known from across Britain. Amazingly, one was actually discovered at the site of the Battle of Bosworth, where Richard met his end. What's interesting about these precious metal badges is that each one of them is very unique. They don't seem to have been mass-produced in any way. They all take the form of the white boar, but if you look at the details, so the features of the face and how the different elements of the boar have been depicted, they're all very different. And this suggests very localised production. These things aren't being created centrally and distributed. They're being made on a kind of one-off, bespoke occasion, probably for an actual individual in mind. Livery badges are found in all different types of materials, from gold and silver right at the top, right down to kind of cheaper cloth examples, which tend not to last and survive in the archaeological record, but we have references to them. So they would have been worn by all kind of strata of society, and we can get a sense of what the owner of the badges may have been like in terms of their economic status and perhaps even their proximity to the king by looking at the materials. So it's likely that this silver gilt boar badge, a custom bespoke crafting piece, was made specifically for one of the closest followers of Richard III. These boar badges were important to Richard, and he distributed them. We have accounts of him commissioning the distribution of them in huge numbers to his followers at different important events during his reign. So at his coronation in July of 1483, he commissioned the distribution of 8,000 of these badges, probably not silver, well, definitely not silver ones. And then later, here in York, at the beginning of September 1483, his son Edward was invested as the Prince of Wales at a grand ceremony in York Minster. And at that occasion, he actually commissioned another 13,000 badges to be distributed to the crowd. So you can imagine the people of York, the citizens of York, and the people who had flocked to the city to attend and get a glimpse of this special event, all wearing badges such as these in different materials to demonstrate their support for a king that they felt very close to. What I think is wonderful, and although we'll never be able to prove this, is it's quite likely that this boar badge was being worn by one of the attendees at that event, and as we said, probably someone fairly close to the king himself. It may have even, because of its materiality, its rich materials, it may have even been a gift from the king to one of his dearest followers. Because of its fine spot and its proximity to York, Stillingfleet being only 6 miles away, it's quite likely that the individual who owned and wore this badge was a notable player in the 15th century York society, possibly even holding one of the notable posts within the city, and was likely a major local landholder. Considering that there was so much support for Richard here in York and Yorkshire, you might expect that livery badges depicting the white boar would be fairly widespread. That's definitely not the case. There's only ever been 2 that have been discovered here. We're very lucky to have them both on display here at the Richard III Coming Home exhibition. I've actually got the second one out of their case as well. Now, this is a very special object. It's on loan to us from English Heritage. And this boar badge was found at Middleham Castle, in the moat at Middleham Castle in 1930. As you can see, it's got some similarities to the example that we've looked closely at, but also a lot of differences. And as we've kind of explored a little bit already, it's likely that this was worn by a very different type of person. It's bigger in size, so if I hold the 2 next to each other, you can see that this example on the right is significantly larger, but it's less detailed and it's made of a different material. It might look quite gold to your eyes, and that's what it's meant to look like. It's meant to look like rich, shining gold. But it's actually made of copper alloy, which is a cheaper, more accessible material. And rather than being made bespoke and cast, it's actually being stamped. You can see that it's rather thin, and the kind of warping nature of it comes from that manufacturing process. It's much thinner and more fragile than this silver example here. So this example, again, you can see that there's a pin on the back. You might not be able to see, but you'll just have to believe me. And this would have likely attached to the hat of a wearer. So we have objects that would have belonged to 2 followers of Richard here of different social strata. What's really interesting about this boar badge is its fine spot. It was found at Middleham Castle. Middleham Castle is such an important place in the story of Richard III. It was where he spent his formative years, it was where he was tutored to become a nobleman, and it's later where he made his family home with his wife, Anne. So he spent a huge amount of his life at Middleham, and to find a badge like this in the environs is a very, very special thing. And we have huge thanks to English Heritage for allowing us to display it in our exhibition. York obviously had a very close connection to Richard III. Richard spent a lot of his time, a lot of his life in Yorkshire, and the support of the people of York was fundamental in allowing him to take the throne. That's just one of the many themes that we explore here in our new exhibition, Richard III Coming Home. And I'd encourage you to come and book your tickets to view the portrait and the boar badges and the plethora of other treasures that are on display here by by visiting York Museums Trust's website. I'm going to pick up the boar badge again, let you have a closer look, and I'm going to ask you to send in any questions that you have via the comments section about either this object, about our archaeological collections in general, or perhaps about Richard himself. It's such a wonderful object, and it's fantastic to be able to show it to you outside of its case. I think by being able to handle it, see it from different angles and in different lights, you get a much greater sense of the intricacies of its decoration. I mentioned that this is a one-off bespoke piece. This is cast silver, so it's likely that the original design would have been carved out of a piece of wax that would have been used to make a one-off mould that molten silver would have then been poured into to create this very special piece. I don't think we've got any questions today. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us. As I say, this is the first of a series of different events that we have as part of our online programme for Richard III Coming Home. They're all online, so they're accessible for everyone. And we've planned a mix of these kind of small curator talks where we're going to get up close and personal with a single object from the collection, a star object or a small group of objects, and also slightly longer expert lectures where we'll be talking to an expert on a wider topic, either about Richard's life or 15th century York. If you are interested in those, you can find out all the details on our website, and you can also sign up for reminders so you don't forget.
We do have actually one question, or a few questions coming through now. Do we know why the boar badge was chosen by Richard and his family?
That's a very good question. Now, livery badges and family symbols, they range from all different types of weird and wonderful animals. Often they are chosen from perhaps a family coat of arms, an animal that's in a family coat of arms, or, and I think in this case, in this instance, an animal is chosen that kind of personifies the characteristics that the ruler, the lord, or the king would like to be seen as holding. So, as we discussed, the boar is a symbol of strength, it's a symbol of ferocity, it's an animal that's big in stature and quite intimidating. These are all characteristics that a king would want to be seen as holding. Boars are also, of course, a symbol of the nobility. They are the prize trophy from hunting, and hunting is a preserve of the elite. Only those with I suppose, the time and the resources would be able to put in the practice and get the equipment required to be able to capture a prize such as a wild boar. So those kind of symbolic characteristics of the boar, coupled with the purity and loyalty and piety that's encompassed by the colour white, that would be, that package is why I think Richard chose the boar as his symbol. There are other symbols associated with Richard, including the sun in splendour, so a rather lovely sun. You sometimes see this depicted on coinage of Richard's. That was borrowed from his brother and the previous king, Edward, so sometimes family houses do kind of pass down their symbols and their heraldry. Of course, there's also the white rose of York, which is synonymous with Richard and his house. And again, this rose would have likely been worn as symbols by his followers. But I think that the boar itself is a little bit more of a personal choice for Richard, and it's all about what the symbol of the boar is telling those who see it.
Someone has asked, the silver one, is it completely flat? So I think to show that again.
So, I'll pop it down here. Yeah, you can see, I mean, it's not completely flat. This wouldn't have been visible to the viewer, so it doesn't have to be quite as special and finished. But the back plate is essentially flat, apart from this loop where it would have been stitched onto clothing. You could actually see some of the slight, perhaps bubbles, maybe not through our camera, but some of the slight kind of imperfections that would have been caused through the metalworking process, and that the craftsperson probably spent lots of time kind of polishing out on the front of the piece.
Someone has also asked, how long does the exhibition last?
The exhibition is showing at the Yorkshire Museum until the 31st of October, so you've got plenty of time to come down and visit us. All of our tickets are, well, most of our tickets are pre-book at the moment anyway, so please do visit our website and pre-book your tickets to avoid disappointment. Fantastic. Unless we've got any last minute questions, we'll draw this to a close.
So someone has actually just asked, sorry, how long has the boar been a symbol of his family?
That's a very good question. As far as I'm aware, the boar was a particular symbol of Richard III himself. So it was fairly short-lived. He most likely adopted the symbol before he became king, but probably around the time when he became the Duke of Gloucester in 1462. So when he started to become more of a kind of prominent public figure in line to the throne part of the royal family, it's likely that's when he would have chosen this symbol. And in fact, it's because Henry Tudor takes over from Richard, the symbol of the white boar doesn't continue after him. However, it's still a very strong symbol for groups today, so groups that are interested in Richard III, the symbol of the white boar is a very poignant symbol for them. And in fact, when we previously displayed the Stillingfleet Boar Badge here at the Yorkshire Museum, we commissioned a number of replicas of the badge that we actually sold in our shop, and they were very, very popular. So you might even see some people walking about on the streets of York to this day wearing the white boar badge proudly on their lapels. Fantastic. If you've enjoyed this collection snapshot, if you've enjoyed the online programming that we've been doing recently, perhaps you saw our curator battles over the past year and a half, do consider donating to York Museums Trust. We rely on visitor income through our ticketing, so like many heritage and cultural institutions across the country and beyond, we've been hit very hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, the Yorkshire Museum opened last Friday for the first time in 15 months. So we're absolutely thrilled to be back open. We would encourage you to come visit Richard, visit your new best friend, the Boar Badge, but also come and visit the rest of our collection, which you can come and see. We've got fantastic treasures spanning right back from the Jurassic period, many millions of years ago, far too old for my archaeological brain to understand, right up to the medieval period. And as you can see, possibly by looking around the gallery behind me, we're situated in the site of St Mary's Abbey. So we really have a little bit of something for everyone. So I hope to see you very soon. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.